they fit in the future of this country and the future of the world. And somebody's got to answer that. Now, it can't just be a politician, but I think part of the vitriol from citizens is this deep hunger for somebody to listen and understand how they're feeling. But you know better than I do. I mean, you're the reporter. I don't know.
So with the closing of MBAs across America, you're shifting into this mode where your career is mostly about giving talks, writing books. I know you're putting together a book proposal right now. And both of those are wonderful things to do and can spur any number of people into action. But you first made your name by directly engaging the world, by driving across the country, meeting with people, making a real difference in people's lives. Do you think at any point you'll feel compelled to shift once again and get closer to the direct task of making a difference?
I asked Jeff backstage, I said, Jeff, if you were in hard-hitting, ruthless journalist mode, what's the question you would ask me? And he basically said, I'm just going to paraphrase, Casey, you've been doing real work. Now you're turning into somebody that's, full of BS. Why is that? I mean, that strikes so much truth in that. That's so great. Here's the reality as I see it. Driving around the country, talking to people, saying you're making a direct difference in the lives of people does not necessarily mean you're making a difference in the lives of people. There are a lot of folks who are doing direct work, myself included, who could totally pull the wool over your eyes and not make any demonstrable difference whatsoever. And I also know that we have, it's funny, I was talking to somebody who runs a big speakers agency a few weeks ago, and he said the vast majority of speakers, 98% was his number, are committing intellectual fraud every time they step on stage. Sure, I am totally aware of the great temptation to be a fraud. I mean, it's a very lucrative business. But the reality is that whether I'm giving a speech or writing a book or building an organization, trying to deliver services, help with people, it all comes down to the same thing, and it's sort of grounded in the values of MBAs across America. 4, 1, give a damn. One of our entrepreneurs said there's no line item on a balance sheet for give a damn, but it's the most valuable thing you've got in the business. Either you care or you don't, and that's the foundational thing. The second is to listen more than you speak, was our second value. And obviously if you're speaking, if you're giving a talk, you're speaking a lot, but it only works if you're listening to people. If you're listening to the things that obviously a very silent audience is saying or feeling, right? It doesn't work if you're just talking at people. The third is to act more than you plan, right? A 100-page PowerPoint deck is never going to save anybody's life, right? And the fourth, and I think most important, is to embrace discomfort and uncertainty. Proximity, feeling at the surface of your soul, the raw connection to humans, is something that whether you're giving a speech or writing a book or trying to build an organization that makes a difference in the lives of people, I mean, the balance, the question, the rubric is all the same. Books have saved my life. Speeches, I was just listening to a speech this morning to try to get in the zone. So I think we really ought to be careful not to confuse mediums that might be tainted with their transformative power.
Who were you listening to this morning?
I was listening to 2 speeches. One was a speech that Maya Angelou gave, who's sort of my patron saint I'm talking about, at HRC in the early 90s. And the other was a speech, Dr. King's mountaintop speech. But I only wanted to hear one little piece of it because it's too long. I mean, not to criticize Dr. King, but, it's a very long speech. And, but there's this one little brilliant section in there, and he's talking about the road to Jericho, and the people and the Levites who didn't stop for the man who had been captured by thieves. Anyway, and he says this thing. He says, the question is not if I stop for them, what will happen to me? The question is, if I do not stop for them, what will happen to them? Right. And I just needed to hear that because sometimes I get very selfish and want to look out for myself. So anyway.
You know, I got to say, we're sitting here in front of 2,000 or so people who are basically waiting for the headlining act to come on. And
well, we got him for another 25 minutes, so let's make it count.
You know, and I'll admit that has me a little bit rattled, but you seem unfazed, which is how you looked when you were delivering your Harvard Business School speech. Is all of this as easy as you make it look?
No, I mean, I didn't sleep last night, and I woke up and I was on the verge of tears most of the day, so I've been falling apart. But,
it doesn't show.
What's that?
It doesn't show.
Good. Yeah. Somebody, if there are any filmmakers here, they should I need a job. No, but I think about this. You talk about the morning of that Harvard speech. That speech really changed my life in a lot of ways, and not because of all the stuff that's happened after. It was the first very personal speech that I wrote. I mean, I've been speaking since I was 5 years old in the church, the Easter speech kind of thing. And so I knew how to give a speech, but this was a different thing because I was trying to work through a question for myself. And I woke up the morning of that speech, and everything just fell apart. It was the coldest day in May in the history of Boston. It was raining. I had about 2 or 3 hours of sleep the night before. And my last run-through had been a complete disaster. And so I'm starting to get real nervous, and I go and lock myself into this conference room on campus to try to compose my nerves. And it's not working at all. I'm sort of having these crying spells and just really, as I say, falling apart. And then about 8:30 that morning, somebody called and told me Maya Angelou had died. And Maya was sort of my patron saint. I had never met her before, but she meant a great deal to me. And so I just took this as a terrible omen that, this speech is going to be so bad, Maya didn't even want to be around for it, And so, man, Jeff, I'm just losing it. So about 9 o'clock, I didn't know what else to do, so I called my grandmother, who's right up in Dallas. She was 81 at the time, and I said, Granny, would you pray for me real quick? And my grandmother's a bit of a prayer fascist, if I dropped a bottle of water, she'd pray over it for 2 or 3 days, And so I knew she'd pray, and I thought I knew what she would say, but she prayed this prayer that totally changed my life. She said, God, will you help Casey remove self so that whatever it is you have to say to people, they can receive it? Because there are a lot of cultures, but there's only one mankind, and all of them can hear you if he gets out of the way. And it was a bit like stepping out of the matrix, I had never really understood how much my ego had been in the way of even the most altruistic things that I had done. I had never really understood what it meant to be a vessel. And it totally changed my life, and the things that people have told me about listening to that speech and what it meant to them, or anything that happened afterwards, didn't register to me as, Casey, you're really awesome, right? It registered to me as, Casey, this is not about you, right? And if you just realize that despite your weakness and your frailties and your ego and your fear and all the hot mess stuff you got going on in your life, if you just realize that there's something larger than you that is using you for some reason that you may never know, then you'll be all right. So, I'm playing with house money at this point, you see. So that's the only way I can sit up here without, needing to be rushed to the hospital.
That answer reminds me that one thing I've seen you talk a lot about in other interviews is the strength you get from being vulnerable, from being open about your fears and your failures and your weaknesses. And, you're 29 years old, but in less than 3 decades, you've inhabited a lot of different worlds. You grew up in a fairly rough part of Dallas. You knew the sanctuary of the Black church. You played very high-level athletics. You went to 2 Ivy League universities. You've worked in Washington, D.C. You've worked on Wall Street. You worked on a Texas political campaign. You've hobnobbed with billionaire philanthropists.
I didn't hobnob.
Okay.
I mean, I was...
You hung out. Of all those worlds you've been in, which world is the toughest to be vulnerable in? I've kind of lived America from the very bottom to the very top in a way. And it's quite frightening on both ends. The most honest thing I could say is, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to be vulnerable in any room, at any time. When I think about the people that I grew up with, or myself when I grew up, the great vulnerability is that if you think about for one moment all the stuff that's bothering you, you'll just completely fall apart. And you just don't have time to have a breakdown. You don't have time to admit your weakness. You don't have time to dream, really, or think about the fullness of your human expression. You're just trying to get through the day. The other end of the spectrum, it's interesting how afraid I have been, my friends have been, in very great jobs, in very great schools with so much opportunity. And there's almost this sense of we've got so much to lose that we don't want to risk somebody thinking we're not God's gift to humankind. But I think the common thing is that there is an extraordinary cost to living a fraudulent life. And it's a cost that you might not even realize until it's too late. And when I say fraudulent, I don't mean a crook. I mean living in a way that is not engaging in an exercise of liberation, which is, as I understand it through bell hooks, an understanding of the truth so powerful there's no turning back from it. Vulnerability is really just about being very considering fear and lying as the enemy, I think, and I think people on both ends of the spectrum need to do that. All right, I got one more question, then I think we're going to open up the floor to questions. The president is here today. He's going to be talking about a lot of these very issues you've been thinking about: technology, social justice, political change, and the intersection of all those things. If you had a few minutes with him and could say something to him about all this, what would you say?
Not that he'd care, but I'd probably say the same thing to him that I say to everybody, that I say to myself every day. I'd ask him, well, Mr. President, what would you say if you were not afraid? I'm not sure that he would necessarily say what he's coming here to say, as far as I understand it, which is, in essence, to sort of, give a gold stamp of approval to the tech and business oligarchs of our time and ask them to save the country. We in this room, at places like South by at conferences like this, we represent a gospel that says that markets and technology will save us. And we have a willingness to pursue that, sometimes at all costs, including the cost of millions of people who are being left behind in this country. I think about, Detroit, where we work quite a bit. 700,000 people, 82% black, 65% below the poverty line. In a major American city. I'm not sure that the biggest solution there is to get more coders. I think about the work that we do in Appalachia, a town in Kentucky, where 1,000 coal miners have lost their job in the past year. I'm not sure just teaching those people how to code is going to heal that wound. I think about the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans, where we had an entrepreneur who opened the first grocery store in the lower Ninth Ward after 10 years after Hurricane Katrina. I mean, 7,000 people in a major American city having to go an hour and a half, 3 buses just to get bread and milk. That is unconscionable. That's not a technological problem. And so I think what he'd say, if he weren't afraid, he'd point out, how can we put a robot on Mars, but we can't get an 8-year-old girl some food? How can we lay fiber optic cables under the ocean, but we can't lay water pipes in Flint? How can we design technology that can help us hear black holes, but we can't hear our brothers and our sisters in our own neighborhoods? I mean, this is a deeply... This is a deeply troubling reality in this country. And I know this president cares deeply about these issues. And I know he's got extraordinary gifts and extraordinary constraints. He inspired me and a whole lot of folks in my generation to think that we could actually do something that mattered. And we really do love him for that. And I think that his job is to push us, not to pat us on the back, to push us to think about the questions we have to ask, the commitments we have to make, the sacrifices that we have to consider. And there will be sacrifices if we're going to answer these questions. If we're going to make the idea and the promise of the country real. And so, I hope, I pray, I plead that he does this on this stage. I hope he dedicates himself to that in his post-presidency also. I think he can be part of this awakening that we're talking about as an ex-president in a way that perhaps he might have been constrained as a sitting president. But I don't think he needs my advice at all.
Ready to open it up to the floor? All right. How are we doing here?
We're here and here. We can open up for a few questions down in this lower section.
Got one over here. Thank you very much. That was a really inspiring speech, and thank you for giving the speech. My question is, and this also ties into the question about the political state of this country, having traveled around the country a lot and met a lot of people in a lot of different places, did you find some people who felt that things sort of used to be better? And if that is the case, what would the implications both for business and political leaders, or what would your thoughts be on what the implications would be for business and political leaders going forward if people think things sort of used to be better?
I'm just 30 years old. I don't know how things used to be, really. 29, actually. I've got a little time. I think about my grandmother's grandfather was born a slave here in Texas. My parents went to segregated schools. They moved into neighborhoods. They were egged when they moved in the neighborhood that I grew up in. I have a hard time believing that things used to be better, you see. But I think what you're getting at, and again, I'm not getting into the politics of this because I'm not a political expert, but I think what you're getting at is that there is a deep sense of loss in certain segments of the population in places that we've worked in, Appalachia, et cetera, where if you put yourself, what is the Atticus Finch thing, if you got in a man's shoes and mushed around a little bit, you might say, I see how you can feel that you have lost something, that you want to get your country back. And the only implication that I know is the implication that we tell our fellows all the time. You're not going to help anybody if you think you're there to save them, if you think you're there because you know more than they do, if you can't listen to them, if you can't try to put yourself in those shoes and say, why do you feel like this? And to say that I hear you. Right? Most humans really just want to know that they are heard and that they matter in some way. And so the worst thing we could do, regardless of what the political answer is, the human thing that we could do is just to try to understand why people feel so hurt and so besieged. And then we might have a sense of what to do.
Okay, I have a question over here on this side.
Hi, Casey. My name is Rosie Von Leela. Thank you very much for your vulnerability on stage. It's very clear that you are getting out of the way for something bigger to speak through you. And I'm curious if you can share a little bit about your personal practices or your personal rituals that help you create that space, because we all have that potential, but we have to create the practices around it. So I'm curious what you do.
Yeah, oh man. I'm glad I'm in Texas for that question, because if I were, somewhere else, people might think I'm kind of crazy. I have had, I think today, somewhere in the realm of half a dozen people praying for me that I have talked to directly. Those people have activated probably, hopefully, I'm prayerful that they've activated some hundreds of other people to pray. And not to pray that I do a good job, but right before I come on, and Todd might could say this, I say the same thing my grandmother said. Will you help me get out of the way so that whatever it is you have to say, people can receive it, because there are a lot of cultures, but there's only one mankind, and all of them can hear you if I get out of the way. It's really just like blocking and tackling, And you don't have to believe in a Christian God or a God at all to have some sense of, I am here to be used for something, and some very rudimentary words to ask that something to do its thing instead of you. And then I think you do the work. I ask this question again every day. What would I do? What would I say if I were not afraid? I can't tell you how fearful I am. I was talking to somebody this morning, and I said, I can't, this last question might be about the president. I can't say anything that seems harsh, or anything like that. But the truth is that I have no personal vendetta against anybody. I'm just trying to find the truth in some way. And the thing that we are most fearful of, I mean capital F, fear, thing I am most fearful of, often is the exact thing that I'm supposed to do. And so by asking this question, what would I do or what would I say if I weren't afraid, it almost turns on the lights in this closet, and it gets all the bugaboos out, And it says, I see you now, and I'm going to kick your butt, that kind of thing. So those are two things that I do on an almost daily basis. And the people around me matter so much. And I don't really care how smart they are. Hopefully they're smart. But if they have no sense of discernment, if they have no connection to something larger than themselves, I just can't be very close to them. And as simple as that.
And I believe that is all the time we have.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you so much.
There will be a short 30-minute break before we begin our next session.
Music is what connects us. There's something about the music that I've made that has touched them, and something about the music that they've made that's touched me. And that's what I love about music. It's a universal language of all people.
I think there's a temptation to see the progress that we've made as having happened despite our failures. Exactly the opposite is true. They've happened because we've harnessed our failures.
Inspired, I'm excited, I want to be a filmmaker. How am I going to get there? What can you do when you are absolutely nowhere and feeling you are full of magic and ideas?
Thank you. Good Lord, this is awesome. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited that our movie is premiering here.
We have with us Megan Smith, the U.S. Chief Technology Officer, Assistant to President Obama, somebody transforming the use of technology in our government, and an icon of bringing people into government who are innovative. Thank you for being here. Used to be a vice president at Google. Speaking of which, Eric Schmidt, of course, you all know, is the executive chairman of Google, used to be the CEO of Google. I've watched him over the years, all the way from Sun Microsystems. We're old enough to remember them. And, but also is on the president's Committee on Science and Technology. I have at least 4 of those words right, PCAST. Anyway, welcome both of them. Thank you all for having me. And I'm going to start with Eric. One of the things when you write about innovation is that it happens at places like South by, but big companies can't do it. You watch Xerox not being able to pull off, you watch Bell Labs, you watch RCA. How does Google break that?
Well, you know, there were always big companies that were innovators. Think about Sony in the 1980s.
And think about the iPod, which they didn't innovate.
And with a powerful founder CEO at the time who transformed Japan for many years. Think about 3M and their culture for many years, a great product company, or even Procter & Gamble. So we had models, but in tech, something would happen that the companies would be very effective when they were sort of this scale, and then they would ossify at some larger scale for some reason. And a lot of people now believe that we're in a different phase. We have a different kind of leadership that understands how to do this. And I think not just Google, but other large companies are proving that they can innovate at scale. At Google, what happened, of course, is that it's founder-driven with Larry and Sergey, and they had the idea of doing interesting new things through a mechanism called Google X. And the idea with Google X is you take overlapping Venn diagrams of really challenging, really hard, but still possible, and you find a leader. Right? In our case, for example, we put together a life sciences team of a doctor who needed both technical groups as well as medical groups to build a contact lens, which we released, which has the world's smallest battery, and will tell you what your blood glucose level is.
I met a group of filmmakers here who's doing something about the future of artificial intelligence. Is it going to be utopian or dystopian? Y'all at Google are probably the furthest along at machine learning and trying to push towards artificial intelligence. Tell us what you're doing and tell us whether we should be worried, as Elon Musk is and others, about some singularity hitting us.
I'm certainly not worried in the next 10 or 20 years about that. We're still in the baby steps of understanding things. We've made tremendous progress with respect to AI. I'll give you an example. Google Translate. There's a cute story this past weekend of an attractive man who's French in Haiti and an attractive woman who's English, also in Haiti, who fell in love over Google Translate. That's AI making somebody's life special, right? Because AI is used to do the translation. When you use any form of Google voice recognition, you're using Google artificial intelligence. That's where we are. So it's a bet as to how far that will go, but most people think we'll be able to get to good question and answering systems in the next 5 years, and maybe get some advice, like how many days should I stay at South by Southwest? And do I really want to go to that concert, or do I really want to go to that dinner? I think that the stuff beyond that is at this point really speculation. I'm not a dystopian, I'm a utopian if you phrase it that way. I think that this technology will ultimately be one of the greatest forces for good in mankind's history, simply because it makes people smarter.
Megan Smith, what is the hardest thing about getting government to innovate? What's the biggest difference from going to Google to the White House, and how do you fix the problems?
Yeah, a couple things. A lot of people ask me about culture, and what I've discovered in Washington is very entrepreneurial people. The technical people have been missing. Not technical people like, of course, our NASA teams and NIH and others, amazing teams, but really the digital government people. And so the team CTO, our team is part of architecting or putting together that strategy, and it's really starting to come together. Todd Park, who's here, worked really closely with the president
Todd
of the team.
came with you?
Yeah, he happens to be here. We're here recruiting.
Todd, where are you?
Is he in this room?
Stand up and wave if you're here.
He's not here. There's
Okay.
Vivian from U.S. Digital Service. So the United States Digital Service was started with leadership from Jen Palka, who was a deputy CTO at the time. So how do we get, basically the idea of this is, how do you get in this country where we make Google, we make Amazon, we make Facebook, these kinds of amazing products and consumer services, why aren't those people in government? And what we're seeing is they're beginning to come. We have the #3 employee of Amazon. Every box you get is related to, with a smile, is software that she built at Amazon. What's your second act after you build Amazon? The American veterans.
And
so we're seeing this talent, and it really hits the theme that Eric's talking about. People do things. Things don't just magically happen, and government has been missing, I call it TQ, like IQ or EQ, our TQ teammates. So the economists and the legislators and all the folks that are there are terrific. It's
You've
just
actually recruited a lot of people out of tech who were successful in tech, including yourself, who wanted to serve the country.
That's right. And so the idea is there's digital service, and so we can come, for a period of years. There's people who come for 2 weeks. There's people who just are doing open source code and helping. So it's a range of service. But it's almost like the government has, we have this great car, and we're all in it, and some of the tires are flat. Right. It's not that we need tons of technical people, but we need some. And I think the experience of healthcare.gov really taught the president and his team that he was missing a set of Americans from the core of the different agencies, and he went out to get us. So you see the 18F team, which is an embedded developer designer team in GSA, together with sort of the folks who run USA.gov and data.gov. There's a lot of that focus. Our team's also working a lot on tech policy, so net neutrality, spectrum, patent reform, all the topics, and having technical people at the table in addition to those advising from the outside.
So speaking of innovation, entrepreneurship happens both inside and increasingly outside of college. How is government adapting to this phenomenon, and what are your views on the subject?
How's government adapting to entrepreneurship inside and outside of college?
In college.
I think one of the things is that universities themselves are adapting to this. So we're seeing great trends where, like Case Western and others are having these kind of startup centers or fab labs or maker spaces or gathering points for the entrepreneurial communities. Many of the universities for much of history, have been part of spin-outs, but that hasn't happened with as much of the kind of startup centers that we see in our tech hubs. So we're starting to see those on campuses. I know that Spelman and Howard and a bunch of others are putting those into place as well. So that's doing really well. I also, back to the UK, in their education system, they realized, to Eric's point earlier about entrepreneurship, that young people were not having exposure to the idea of becoming an entrepreneur as a career track. And so they started a very simple program called Founders for Schools. And they just make sure that 3 entrepreneur types show up at your school for an assembly Q&A program for an hour. And they're trying to roll that out across the UK. And we're trying to bring that kind of stuff to this country.
And the White House and you and us at the Aspen Institute are doing a lot to reinvent the concept of what a community college is, which I think is going to be disruptive and at the vanguard of solving some of our problems.
As the lectures move to video, and then you have great performance lectures, but really you can do much more interactive, personalized learning with video, those spaces can open up into these great maker spaces. So we're very hopeful about the community colleges being a nexus for entrepreneurship and making and moving code boot camps onto campus, et cetera, so they can be a great source of innovation for the community on any topics. I'll give you an example. We're going to be hosting an event later in about a month where universities are working with their cities on city problems. So CMU is doing amazing work in the city of Pittsburgh. Howard is doing work with water. I mentioned the South Bend mayor working with Notre Dame. So where people are kind of using their college as a lab place for the city itself, the city as an ecosystem lab is really exciting. So there's great opportunities to pull students into real problems that would be incredibly engaging to them and entrepreneur on behalf of issues and challenges that we have.
So let's get down to business. Cosmos is not your everyday run-of-the-mill science documentary. I mean, first of all, it is one of the executive producers is the multi-talented Seth MacFarlane of Family Guy fame, and it's on the Fox network, and it's got, presumably, it will have beautiful Hollywood special effects, care of Bill Pope. So given all of this, given that it is so remarkably different from the average science documentary, what's its job? What do you hope it will achieve?
Well, so your typical documentary, when you think of them, involves a lot of let's put the camera on the tripod and interview the expert, and then you go to the next expert, and then you stitch it together. And so they tend to be informative, and that serves an important role in the television portfolio. But Cosmos, in its original incarnation in 1980, as well as what we have done to continue that story, has always been more than that. It's managed to take the science that's out there, put a thread from that science through you and onto elements of the universe that show you why that science matters to you and how you might be compelled to respond in the face of that information. And by the end of a show, and especially by the end of the series, we'd like to think that we've sort of woven this tapestry with that thread, with you in the center of the tapestry, and you get to look around and say, now I know and understand my place in the universe.
A tremendous amount of inspiration is the first step. It's a necessary, but maybe not completely sufficient route to science literacy.
Well, when I think of science literacy, I don't think of a body of knowledge. It was announced in the introduction that 1 in 4 Americans doesn't give the right answer to the question, who orbits what, right? Earth around the sun or the sun around the earth. And you know something? That doesn't even bother me as much as it bothers other people. My personal definition of science literacy is how much do you still wonder about the world around you? What is your state of curiosity? How much, when you pass something that you don't know or understand, do you pause and reflect on what the answer might be? To me, that is the essence of science literacy. And all children do this. Children walk around and they turn over rocks and they break stuff. And And we as adults try to constrain that activity when it's all exploratory. And it's the exploration, for me, that is the science literacy. And when you explore, all those answers come for free. So I don't want to just hand out answers, because if I do that and something new comes around, you might then complain that it conflicts with your philosophy, because you didn't have the curiosity to wonder how we came to know that was true in the first place.
So I'm just going to list off some stuff here. So 80% of Americans say that they are interested in new scientific discoveries. For at least the last 3 decades, roughly 80% of Americans strongly agree that research that advances the frontiers of knowledge is necessary and should be supported by the federal government. Yet, as Sean mentioned, 1 out of 4 people still think the sun moves around the earth. More than 40% of people think that astrology is very scientific. This is new. This is the highest it's been in 3 decades. It's increasing. Our skepticism of astrology appears to be declining. Now, there's a strange blend of positive at the beginning. You know, we tend to be really interested in scientific discovery, yet, as we just talked about, the knowledge appears to be, there's just this blend, and I'm wondering, what do you think is really going on?
Part of it is a sign of the failure of the educational system. Not, there could be other failures I don't know about. The one in particular I'm thinking of is the failure of the educational system to empower people to even know what science is as an enterprise. Because science class, you're learning stuff, you're learning facts, and that's an aspect of science. But if you don't know how science works, what it is, why it works, you are then susceptible to the rest of this kind of thinking, to pseudoscientific thinking, to thinking that you can cherry pick a scientific result that feels good to you and reject the others. That means you don't understand how science works. And I'm not going to debate you on that, on what you think is true. I'm going to have a conversation about what science is. And it's out of that seed blossoms your skepticism for things someone might be telling you about your love life or your financial, because of where the planets are in the sky. And so it's the missing skepticism that is the problem, not simply the fact that that's what they think.
There is something that Neil is amazing at, obviously with analogy and giving a sense of scale to things that are very difficult to imagine. And I adore this one thing that he does, and I'm wondering if we could do a little illustration.
I have no idea what you want me to do.
Oh, okay. You're gonna need to pick 2 volunteers.
Pick 2 volunteers. This is a front row thing, I guess.
Do you want to hold the earth? I'm
happy to.
terrified that I'm going to hold it the wrong way. Now I'm going to get 2 other...
The ice cap is melted completely, apparently, from the north.
Now,
Because these are okay here. So if you melt the north ice cap, all that ice is floating, so you don't raise the water levels on the earth, because they were already in the water, and so that doesn't change. It's only if you melt, where did it go? Greenland, which Greenland is already melted here. There's no ice on the top of that. But we do have ice in Antarctica. So this is maybe, how far in our future?
You know, Neil, we're going to be doing something
else. Sorry. No, I got Earth here. I don't know.
I
Sure, go.
absolutely made an error here. But anyway,
What's that?
Now, what are these things? I don't know. But I was terrified of making a mistake in front of Neil, obviously.
This is about the size of the moon?
Thank God.
Yes.
Got it right.
That's about the size of the moon.
20-inch in diameter. This is 5 inches. So who knew the moon was that large? This is Mars.
Sure, that could be Mars, yeah.
It could be Mars. 10 inches?
Yeah, that's right.
Inches,
That's about right, sure.
Okay, awesome. We're on a roll. So do you want to hand the moon, and we're going to do an experiment of how far, to this scale, if we're according to this scale, how far away the moon might be.
Oh, sure,
So,
okay, so
let's
I'll give you the moon.
send
Here,
somebody
come here. Stand right here. Okay, you now have the moon. And so,
You're gonna have
put it where the moon is, relative,
Where do
Earth is the
where do you
size.
think it is?
Right about there? That's about the right distance?
Given that this is 20 inches and this is 5, you think the moon is...
Right about there. Okay. That is way off, okay? Okay, okay. Just start backing up.
Yeah, and
Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
turn around while you're going.
Keep going. That's about right. Yeah, that's about the Earth-Moon distance. Yeah, you know why? You've been lied to by textbooks that have to squeeze them both into the same page.
I do want to talk, just before we go to questions for the audience, a little bit about space exploration. When are we going to go? Will it just be governments that are going to take us there? Will it be an international collaboration? Is the fact that Jade Rabbit on the moon in China, is that even something that we should remotely think about or care about? What about the privatization and commercialization of space exploration?
So the farthest we've been is to the moon, and that feels far on this scale. Right. Shrink that puppy down, it's nothing compared to the planets and the rest of the stars. So the space is a frontier, and I don't need to convince this audience of that. But there's some practical reasons, I think. I want to go because it's cool and you discover stuff. But there's some practical reasons that I think should not be overlooked. Yes, you want to be looking up if the asteroid is going to come and take us out, so that you would deflect it. And if you live in an innovation nation where people are scientifically literate, whether or not you are a scientist, you want to be around people who will, upon learning there's an asteroid headed our way, what's your first reaction when you learn this? Is it run, buy toilet paper, water, or whatever you need to run, you can run, or you can say, how can I deflect that? You want people around you who are thinking that way. And so space can render us extinct, because the universe is one of the greatest killers of life. But also, the innovations necessary to perform all of this, I think they can affect a culture in a way that turns everybody into people who think about tomorrow.
Music is what connects us. There's something about the music that I've made that has touched them. There's something about the music that they've made that's touched me. And that's what I love about music. It's a universal language of all people.
I think there's a temptation to see the progress that we've made as having happened despite our failures. Exactly the opposite is true. They've happened because we've harnessed our failures.
Inspired, I'm excited, I want to be a filmmaker. How am I going to get there? What can you do when you are absolutely nowhere and feeling you are full of magic and ideas?
Thank you. Good Lord, this is awesome. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so excited that our movie is premiering here.
Let's talk about the early days of Twitter here.
Yeah, I do. Green means go. This is funny because I forget who took this, but this was some graffiti on a wall in 2007. here at South by Southwest. We'd been working on Twitter since 2006, and it was fun. We were having fun.
Was it still part of Obvious?
It was Obvious.
So it wasn't its own full company
It
yet.
wasn't Odeo, it was Obvious.
Right.
And it wasn't Twitter. And it was a project within Obvious. And we were working on it, and we were having so much fun with it. We were finding joy in our work. We loved it. But we came here, and this was the first time we saw Twitter in the wild. You know, this was the first time we saw a high concentration of people using the service all at the same time in the same place. And you know, one story that stands out is the story of a person who was at a pub, one of these pubs, and he wanted to talk about work and what people are working on, and he sent out a tweet that said, you know, this place is too loud. We should go over to this other place, and he named it because it's quieter. And in the 8 minutes it took him to walk over there, the place was filled to capacity, line out the door, plan totally backfired, but. But my God, like when I heard the story, like it was spine tingling because you know, after reading all your books about emergence and the whole is greater than the sum of the parts and all this stuff, I said, I think we have something new here. We've created something that allows humans to sort of coordinate in real time and move together en masse, and the image of a flight of birds moving around an object in flight, a flock of birds moving around an object in flight like a telephone pole. A bunch of individuals all of a sudden become one organism, and then a bunch of individuals again. And yes, this happens in nature, but to my knowledge, it didn't happen with people. And we had created this technology, and that was allowing people to do that. So. It was spine tingling in that, yeah, this was just a pub crawl, but what if it had been something important? And so we went right back and we started. We literally founded Twitter Incorporated, I think, the day after.
I mean, and that was one of the things I think that people initially misunderstood about Twitter, that it was seen as the kind of ultimate short attention span kind of vanity publishing, like I'm going to tell the world what I had for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seemed to kind of an outsider that it was just all about me. I'm just going to, the world is very interested in what I'm doing.
Right.
And it turned out to have this much more collective dynamic that was probably was hard for you guys to see until you saw it in practice in a space like South by Southwest.
Absolutely. So we came back, we built Twitter, working on it, we were heads down. And then, you know, the lesson learned from South by Southwest was amazing. But then we saw everything happening. I mean, just stuff was happening all around the world. And Twitter is being mentioned in concert with it. You know, whether it deserved it or not. You know, the point is people were doing things. People were doing amazingly brave things. And they happened to be using Twitter sometimes to do these things. And you know,
that's a collective action point, that you have somewhat self-organizing protest movements all around the world. I mean, I love the fact that Occupy Wall Street was a hashtag for months before it was a movement, right? It started with the hashtag Occupy Wall Street, and it took like 2 months before people were like, hey, what if we actually occupied Wall Street? Like that's such a good hashtag, we should go do it, you know? And the idea that you guys were, in a sense, creating this incredible platform for political protest, whether you think that it was central or just an important, you know, kind of role in these protest movements, it's clear that Occupy started with a hashtag. There's no denying that. And again, that was not at all part of the vision initially.
No, the initial vision was, hey, look, you can see what your friends are up to.
Yeah. So you definitely have situations where a technology emerges, a new platform emerges, and because of the kind of intrinsic properties of that technology, certain ideas or certain social changes become possible or become imaginable for the first time, right? Mm-hmm. And it's important to look at history that way. It's important to look at our own lives and our own society that way. What becomes imaginable once you have something like Twitter? The technology is driving things. It is a big part of that story. But there is also kind of human agency that's part of that as well.
Well, that's the thing that I always think about is that, the thing that I like to say is that Yeah, well, the way I like to describe myself is as an internet guy, an internet guy who believes in the triumph of humanity with a little help from technology.
Yeah.
And the idea that I have a simple ordered list in my head, which is number one, people, number two, technology. And I've worked at Google, and a lot of times people are just coming up with technology, and certainly as a driver. But like that, your example is a perfect example of my basic fundamental belief that people are good, and if you build the right tools to help them do good things, they'll prove it to you on a daily basis. And that's also something I write about extensively in the book, is like all of these examples of if you build it, they will do good things. And it happened over and over and over again. At Blogger we saw people are basically good. At Twitter we saw people are basically good. I mean, it's not just like this hallucinogenic optimism. It has to be true, because if we couldn't build these large scale collaborative networks, they wouldn't work if most of the people weren't good.
Yeah.
Same is true for cities. We wouldn't be sitting in a building. We wouldn't have all of this stuff if people weren't wired to communicate. If people weren't, if it wasn't in our DNA to cooperate and help each other.
It'll be fine. There was a guy right here. So if my height where he was like kind of like I could shoot over him, but if their like arms are all in the air, then so. I'm sorry. I already told Louise to go with the wire. It's a better picture of that. That's what I was telling her, but you know how our gallery works. Like they'll pull like every picture of Obama and Austin from like the last 20 years.
Like the first three pictures will be like daily.
They just like go Ours is a Hearst template. It's like Hearst has all like they've coded things to pick up words, and then it's like a free for all. Like they have to go in and manually take them out. They don't want that. They just want to do that unless it's something really involved. We had a thing with the marathon, and they didn't. It was like 2016 or 2015 marathon. There was like no pictures from our marathon. It was like from like 2008. So I didn't tell them that. I was like, this is really weird. And they did fix that. But I've fought with them for 7 years. I need to fight with them tomorrow. I don't care. I feel bad for people like them, but it's like, the guy that wants to win is like from the inside of the has a much more intimate feel than a lot of things. Someone came out and introduced the guy. He's gonna walk out, right?
You already know. Oh, okay. That makes sense. How very fair of him. So that's going to end up on like TMZ and like, can't pick a side.
Right? That's what it said. dog. I have a cat. Normally, if I have another dog, I can't do like if we have a dog today, I'm like, the cat goes and he does it. Your dog is like your cat's, but cat is barrel sniper. Very grumpy cat. Very grumpy. When I got it, it was 10. Really overweight. Some pictures on your phone.
Here to introduce today's special keynote presentation, please welcome South by Southwest Interactive Festival Director Hugh Forrest.
Wow. Good afternoon. My name is Hugh Forrest. I am the director of the South by Southwest Interactive Festival. Not me. Welcome to one of the most special events, if not the most special event, in the 30-year history of South by Southwest. We are extremely excited to have President Obama joining us today at the Long Center, and we're even more excited that the President will today be talking about 21st century civic engagement and community service. This is a topic that we've covered extensively at South by Southwest and a topic that we're passionate about. It's something that Casey Gerald of MBAs Across America covered in today's opening keynote, and it's something that we will celebrate on Sunday evening, March 13th at the Dewey Winburn Community Service Awards at the JW Marriott. The participation of both the President and the First Lady at South by Southwest Music signifies a timely shift in the evolution of our event, where ideas and topics converge in hopes of uniting all industries and cultures. As each new generation comes to South by Southwest, they look for ways that they can be of service, We feel it's important to reflect and support the message and believe the keynotes of the President and the First Lady will inspire attendees to that purpose. The interviewer for today's session is Evan Smith, who is founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune, which is a groundbreaking online publication based here in Austin. Now, please join me in welcoming the 44th President of the United States of America, Barack Obama, to South by Southwest 2016.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. President.
It's good to see you, and hello, Austin. I love Austin, Texas. Thank you. It's just good to be back.
Nice to have you here. Welcome. Welcome to Austin. Welcome to South by Southwest. Let's make a little news. You stopped at Torchy's on the way in from the airport.
I did.
You did.
I did.
Would you please share with the world what you told me backstage, your order, perfectly in keeping with your political views?
I ordered a Democrat, but then I ordered a Republican and an independent because I wanted to give all people a proper hearing.
That's right.
I wanted to be fair.
Bipartisan in tacos as in life.
That's exactly right.
That's how it goes. Mr. President, you're very nice to be here with us today, and you came for a purpose. You want to accomplish something. You said as much in your weekly radio address last weekend. I got the opportunity to hear it. Some people in the room have not heard it. For their benefit and people outside the room, would you say why you're here? Make the pitch in miniature, please.
Well, first of all, I'm here because I like excuses to come to Austin, Texas. And, that's a good enough reason. And I want to acknowledge your mayor, Steve Adler, who bought tacos with me.
No.
I normally don't do this, but I'm going to embarrass somebody. I want to also acknowledge the chancellor of the Texas system because he's one of my favorite people and a truly great American, Bill McCraven, who I think is over there.
Yep.
It's pretty rare where a chancellor of a university system can really mess you up. So in case any of the students are wondering, don't mess with your chancellor. But I knew him as admiral, and he's served America as well as anybody's served it. Look, we are at a moment in history where technology, globalization, our economy is changing so fast. And this gathering, South by Southwest, brings together people who are at the cutting edge of those changes. Those changes offer us enormous opportunities, but also are very disruptive and unsettling. They empower individuals to do things that they could have never dreamed of before, but they also empower folks who are very dangerous to spread dangerous messages. And part of my challenge since I've been president is trying to find ways in which our government can be a part of the positive change that's taking place and can help convene and catalyze folks in the private sector and the nonprofit sector to be part of the broader civic community in tackling some of our biggest challenges. And just three things that I talked about during my weekly address where this group, I think, is primed to make a difference. Number one, we're spending a lot of time figuring out how can we make government work better through technology, digital platforms, and so forth. So, for example, we've reduced the FAFSA form process where you apply for student aid by about 2/3 just by digitalizing it, putting it online, making it a little more common sense. We have made it now possible to apply for Social Security online in ways that couldn't be done before. Across agencies, we're interacting every day with our government, and the question is, how do we make that work better? Because an anti-government mentality grows if people feel frustrated because they're not getting good service. The second thing that these new technologies allow us to do is to tackle big problems in new ways. We had a conference in Washington a few weeks back on what we're calling precision medicine. The capacity today to potentially cure diseases because we understand the human genome and we understand that a cure for me may not be the same as a cure for you. And there's incredible research taking place all around the country, but we haven't gathered all that data together to make sure that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And number three, we want to make sure that we're using big data, analytics, technology to make civic participation easier. Voters, increasing voting rates and making sure that people are informed about who they're voting for and why they're voting. Making sure that community organizations or activists are able to meet and help to shape our society in new ways. So the reason I'm here really is to recruit all of you. It's to say to you as I'm about to leave office, how can we start coming up with new platforms, new ideas, new approaches across disciplines and across skill sets to solve some of the big problems that we're facing today. Because I've said this before, I said at the State of the Union, the most important office in a democracy is the office of citizen. And right now, with all the talent that's out there, our government's not working and our politics isn't working as well as it should. The only way we're going to solve that is make sure that we're getting citizens involved in ways that we haven't up until now.
Mr. President, the theory of bringing tech more closely aligned with government and solving problems is great, but the reality is that the culture of the tech sector and the culture of government could not be more different. Government is big and bloated and slow and risk averse, and it's run on outmoded systems and outmoded equipment. Tech is sleek and streamlined and fail fast and enamored of the new and the shiny. How do you take these two things that seem culturally to be so unalike and put them together in a way where they can and want to work together?
You know, well, let me give you an example of the big and the bloated and the frustrating. You may recall that I passed this law called the Affordable Care Act to sign people up for health care. And then the website didn't work.
I heard that. Heard that, yeah.
And this was a little embarrassing for me because, you know, I was the cool early adapter president.
Right.
And
not exactly an advertisement.
My entire campaign had been premised on having really cool technology.
Yeah.
And social media and all that. Well, here's what happened, was that the procurement systems, the specifications, the way that software was built in government was adapted for the age when procurement was for buying boots or buying pencils or buying furniture as opposed to buying software. And so there's an example of an outdated system, bloated, risk-averse, not working well. Here's what happened as a consequence of healthcare.gov breaking down, though. We had to bring in a SWAT team of all my friends from Silicon Valley and from Austin and some of the best software engineers in the world to come in and fix it, which we did in about 3-4 months' time. And what we realized was that we could potentially build a SWAT team, a world-class technology office inside of the government that was helping across agencies.
Yep.
We've dubbed that the U.S. Digital Services. And we've got some of the top talent from Google, from Facebook, from all the top tech companies. These folks are coming in some cases for 6 months, in some cases for 2 years. And they are making an enormous difference in making sure that veterans are getting services on time, fixing outdated systems, making sure that agencies like the Small Business Administration that has been clunky is redesigning itself so that if an entrepreneur wants to start up a business here in Texas, that they can go to one spot and within a day they've handled all the regulatory red tape that used to require them maybe months to navigate. Now, the folks who are working in this digital service, they're having a great time. And in part because they are harnessing incredible skills to a purpose where they know that millions of people can be helped.
Yep.
And what they'll tell me is that as long as they feel that they've got a president and somebody who's providing some air cover, there's no system that they can't get in there and work and change and make it significantly better. So part of my job is to try to institutionalize that over the next several years. And I want to make sure that the next president and the federal government from here on out is in constant improvement mode, and we're constantly bringing in new talent and new ideas to solve some of these big problems. It can be done. It requires some effort,
right.
But everything requires some effort.
Because, Mr. President, you know, I talked to tech people in advance of your coming, and I said if you were asked by the President or by the administration to come in and work with them, what would the conditions need to be that would make it possible? And they said, well, we would need some kind of a carve-out, some kind of flexibility from rules and regulations. We would be willing to work with the government. Maybe we would then donate back the IP to the public sector. Right. Or if we want to give some of the employees from our payroll the opportunity to work in government, maybe we could get, as you would with another kind of donation, some sort of a tax break back. We'd be willing to work, but the government would have to come at least a little bit in our direction. You're saying you're willing to do that.
Well, I'm not saying I'm willing to do it. I'm saying we're doing it.
You're doing it now. Yes, sir.
It is currently happening.
Right.
And the opportunities are there. But I want to focus on the fact that there are different ways for people here to get engaged. It's not just you coming in, although we want to create a pipeline where there's a continuous flow of talent that is helping to shape the government. The other thing that we're doing, though, is we're also convening people to solve problems, and they may, in their existing roles, be able to work together to make a huge difference. I'll give you a specific example. Before I came in here, I met with an incredible group of people, entrepreneurs, movie makers, organizers, tech leaders, to talk about how we make a real difference on countering violent extremism. It's not enough, if we're going to defeat ISIL, just to take out their leadership or to control certain territories. If in the virtual world they are consistently reaching kids here in the United States or elsewhere in the world and recruiting them and twisting their minds to do terrible things, we've got to be able to penetrate that. For good reasons, we don't want the government to be the lead on that. First of all, we're not credible with the people who might be receiving those messages. Second of all, it's dangerous if the government gets in the business of propaganda. So what I said to them was, we'll help convene and put you guys in a room together where there are resources that are necessary, we can help provide it. But essentially, you figure out how we can reach young people who might be vulnerable to extremist messages. You tell us, based on the analytics and the data and the algorithms that you're working with on a day-to-day basis to sell products, what is it that's going to really penetrate here? How can we amplify powerful stories that are already taking place so that they're on platforms that can reach as many people as possible?
So whether you solve the problem or they solve the problem, it's all good.
Exactly. I'll give you a second example, and that is the issue of voting. I mentioned this earlier. We're the only advanced democracy in the world that makes it harder for people to vote. You're laughing, but it's sad. We take enormous pride in the fact that we are the world's oldest continuous democracy, and yet we systematically put up barriers and make it as hard as possible for our citizens to vote. And it is much easier to order pizza or a trip than it is for you to exercise the single most important task in a democracy, and that is for you to select who's going to represent you in government. Now, I think it's important for a group like this, as we come up to an election, regardless of your party affiliation, to think about how do we redesign our systems so that we don't have 50% or 55% voter participation on presidential elections, and during off-year congressional elections, you got 39 or 40% vote.
Mr. President, you're in the state with the worst voter turnout in the country over
By
the last 3
coincidence,
elections. We would take 55% tomorrow if we could get it.
There is a reason I'm bringing this up.
Yeah.
But it's not just Texas. So one of the things that we're doing is engaging folks who are already doing interesting work in the online space. How can we create safe, secure, smart systems for people to be able to vote much easier online? And what are the technologies to help people get aware of what they're voting about, who they're voting for? That's, again, an issue where you don't want the federal government engineering all that.
Right.
But what we can do is to have the incredible talent that's represented in this auditorium really spend time thinking about that and getting to work on it.
But governments, Mr. President, governments need to play a role in that they have to pass legislation that enables some of these things.
Yes.
So in Texas, again, a state with terrible voter turnout over time, we broke records on primary day, but we still had the second worst voting age participation of any state that's voted so far. We can't get out of our own way. You need in Texas legislation that enables this. We won't even allow people to register to vote register to vote, not vote. Register online in Texas. Register online. We can pay our taxes. We can hold our phone up at the supermarket to pay with our credit card, but somehow online voter registration is perceived to be insecure. Or same-day registration.
It's not insecure. It's done because the folks who are currently governing the good state of Texas aren't interested in having more people participate. Look, but so obviously you've got to make a political argument about why this is important, and not every state is going to move along the same direction. But I will tell you that if we can create more and more models that show that if made easier, more people vote, and that it is seamless, and that it is secure, and jurisdictions that are willing to adopt and support these new mechanisms are in place. And if we are building more models of civic engagement and using the tools and technology that we're doing, that we're using to buy things, to participate in self-governance, then over time, look, Texas is never going to be an early adapter of what I'm talking about here. But over time, pressure builds for us to create systems that make government more responsive and make it work better.
Let me stay with Texas and touch on something you alluded to earlier, that there are a lot of people in the world today who don't like government, don't trust government, don't think government can do good. You are in Texas, the hating on government capital of the Western world, right? We hate government so much we'd rather have no government, except we then wouldn't have anybody to sue. So we need government for at least one reason. How do you change the perception that government can do good at a moment when people have decided government can't do good?
Yeah, well, part of it is the fact that when government does great things, we take it for granted, and it's not a story. I mean, every day, government is delivering for everybody in this room, whether you know it or not. I can find the fiercest libertarian in the room with, who despises every level of government, thinks it's all corrupt, but they're checking the weather on their phone, and lo and behold, it turns out that there's a government satellite out there that is facilitating that. And they'd be really irritated if they couldn't figure out whether it was going to be 70 and sunny or 60 and rainy tomorrow. But that's not reported as government. We just take for granted. Of course there are roads, and of course there's a geosatellite system, and of course we have special forces who are making sure that folks aren't blowing up our buildings. Well, the part of our task is to tell a better story about what government does. Now, government is often its own worst enemy, in the sense that it has to also be more responsive where people interact in a direct way with government. I've said before that I could change the politics of America faster than just about anything if I could just take control of all the DMVs in the country. Because, if somebody goes to get their license renewed and it takes them 2 hours.
And they walk away frustrated.
And everybody's kind of surly.
Right.
That's their impression of government.
Yeah.
Or if their primary interaction with government is the IRS. You just don't have a good association with government when you're writing that check. But if we make it easier, if it's being done online, if suddenly you have the capacity to interact with government in a way that also gives you some feedback about how your tax dollars are being spent, or why this is important, or what you're doing, so that it's a two-way exchange as opposed to something that feels distant and that you have no control over, then people's attitudes change. Now, here's the problem, and this is why politics matter. If there are those who despise government, oftentimes because the absence of government allows them to pollute or keep as much money as they can, or not have to answer to consumers who are complaining about their practices. If they are controlling those who are currently in government, and government gets starved of resources, then it can be a self-reinforcing notion that, in fact, government doesn't work because it's being starved. A great example of this, by the way, I met with financial regulators this week to just get a report back on how we're doing on Wall Street reform. One of the things that the left and the right agree on is that after the financial crisis, nothing changed. And all those folks on Wall Street who had done these terrible things just got away with it, and we didn't change the system, and it's just the way it is now. Well, the truth of the matter is actually a lot changed. The banks have been forced to capitalize much more. Some of the shoddy practices have been shut down. We set up a Consumer Finance Protection Bureau that prevents some of the mortgage practices that had ended up not only hurting individuals, but also destabilizing the entire system. Derivatives now have to be set up on a clearinghouse platform that allows oversight in a way that didn't exist before. The financial system is much more stable than it used to be, and too big to fail actually is much less likely, because if somebody engages in reckless practices, we can now unwind them without them bringing down the entire system.
So how come we don't know it then?
Well, first of all, that's not a story that is interesting to people. What's more interesting is a cynical view that terrible things happened and nothing got changed. And that's how it gets reported, both in popular culture as well as in the media. But the second thing that's happened is where it's not, where we still have work to do in this space. The main reason we have work to do in this space is because this Congress has prevented oversight agencies like the SEC and the CFTC from having enough staff and resources to be able to enforce as well as they could some of the laws and the rules that are put in place. And so we go back to the need for civic engagement. We cannot solve the problems in government, and we cannot solve the problems that we face collectively as a society unless we, the people, are paying attention.
Right.
And in an age in which people are getting information through digital platforms, through the internet, where people's attention spans have shrunk, it is critical that all of you who are shaping this environment are spending time thinking about how are we getting people, how are we getting citizens engaged, and you yourselves have to be engaged and spend some time thinking about it. It doesn't mean you have to do it full time. It doesn't mean that you have to run for office yourself, but it does mean that whatever your field is, there is a way right now for you to engage and participate to take this democracy back in ways that we have not seen in a very long time.
What you're preaching, Mr. President, again, nobody will take issue with the idea of more civic engagement in a digital age, but the question is whether everybody, all of us in this country, are in the same digital age, right? You're in a state that is seeing rapid changes in its population. Will soon be Hispanic majority. Well, in this state, as in a lot of other states, the digital divide, access to Wi-Fi, access to devices, continues to be an enormous problem. 50% of adults in Hispanic households have no access to internet at home. 54% of African Americans have access, but 46% do not. Many more white households have access to the internet than do non-white households. We know that we have this massive digital divide in this country, in Texas and elsewhere. Shouldn't the government, before we start providing all this civic engagement through the digital space, make sure that everybody's in the digital space first?
Which is actually exactly what we've been trying to do over the last several years. When we passed the Recovery Act, the stimulus that was very controversial at the time and that continues to be criticized by the other party, despite the fact that unemployment's now below 5%. And we avoided a Great Depression, but thanks, Obama. But embedded in that was a massive investment in making sure that communities that had been left out of broadband and Wi-Fi were reached. And we have made enormous progress in extending more and more internet access, high-speed internet access to communities all across the country. A second example, we set up something called Connect Ed, where our goal, and we're on track to meet this by 2018, is that 99% of classrooms have access to high-speed wireless, and the way we've done that, in part, is through federal spending. But what we've also done is we've partnered with an array of companies.
Right, private industry.
Private industry has really stepped up.
Right.
And so part of the task, you're right, that we've got to make sure that given the power of this space, everybody is plugged in. But one of the great tricks to all this is making sure that whatever government is doing is then supplemented with and enhanced by a private sector and non-profit sectors that are ready to step up. And it's not just, by the way, getting, a line in or Wi-Fi there. It's also training teachers. We've set up something called, Open Book? Somebody out here, huh? There you go, Open eBooks. I knew there was somebody in the audience who knew about this, who, to make sure that kids in places that don't have a lot of books, that suddenly they have access to this enormous e-library, and that becomes folded into the mechanics and the infrastructure that's been
Mr.
set
President,
place.
very good. It's important to have wired classrooms, but part of the problem is that 70% of homework assignments, by one measure, given by teachers, require some internet access.
Right.
So it's one thing to wire classrooms. The problem is homes. There was a story in the New York Times about a month ago that had a couple of kids from McAllen, a brother and sister, standing outside their school building into the wee hours of the night, having to do their homework on their phones, using the Wi-Fi from the school after hours because they had no Wi-Fi at home.
Which is why,
this is 2016.
Which is why we've set up something called Opportunity Networks that is going to go into public housing, rural communities, low-income communities, to make sure that access is available precisely so those young people
You're going to
can
try
do
to
the
solve
work.
this problem.
I'm trying to solve every problem, but what I'm, but here,
you got to have a goal. I understand.
but here's the point that I want to make. I mean, these are solvable problems, but it's not a matter of us passively waiting for somebody else to solve it. And that's part of the mindset that I'm trying to break. I tried to break it back in 2007, 2008 when I ran for this office. As you will recall, the slogan was not "Yes, I can." It was "Yes, we can." And we could sit here and you could list out an array of problems, inequities that have to be addressed. What I'm saying is, number one, government actually works better in so many areas than we give it credit for, because we tend to focus on those areas where it's not working as well. Number two, part of the reason that government doesn't always appear to provide a satisfactory solution is because government has to take on the hardest problems. Right? The private sector doesn't have to figure out how to educate the poorest kids. The private sector doesn't have to figure out how to protect us from a terrorist cell. If you have aging, sick veterans, the private sector may not serve them as well, or to figure out how do we get homeless off the streets. So the toughest problems are government problems, and finding solutions to those things can take time, and so you're never going to get 100% satisfaction the way you might get that perfect cup of coffee, the perfect latte, or the perfect, the lowest price on your ticket to, Cancun, because these are harder problems. But the third point that I'm trying to make here is that if we can reconceive of our government so that the interactions and the interplay between private sector, nonprofits, and government are opened up, and we use technology, data, social media, in order to join forces around problems, then there's no problem that we face in this country that is not soluble. And the key is to have incredible talent, as is gathered here, to focus on it. It's not enough just to focus on what's the cool next thing. Part of what we have to do is to figure out how do we use and harness the cool next thing to make sure that everybody in this country has opportunity.
Well, I want
and
to
to make
use
sure
it.
that we're dealing with our environment in an effective way.
I want to use and harness the time we have. We've got 10 minutes left. We
Nice
started a little
segue.
late. Thank you. I
That was cool.
appreciate it. Took the baton here, Mr. President. I took the baton.
That was good.
I've done this before.
That was good, man.
Yeah. We asked for questions from regular folks through the Texas Tribune website. We've got a few of those, and I want to ask you about a couple of those. Some are related to the topics we've been talking about, and some are not. I'm going to go quickly so that we use the time we have. A bunch of people wanted me to ask you about Apple and the situation with Apple and the FBI. You're trying to persuade the tech community that they should work with government, but it looks to the tech community, at least some in the tech community, that government is the enemy of the tech community in the way that it's dealing with Apple, some in the tech community. The question I want to ask you is, putting aside the specifics of this specific case, the legal fight between the company and the FBI, there are big questions around the idea of how you balance the need for law enforcement to conduct investigations and the needs of citizens to protect their privacy. This is the old privacy versus security debate. Mr. President, where do you come down on the privacy versus security debate?
Well, first of all, I can't comment on the specific case.
Right.
So let's set that aside. All of us value our privacy, and this is a society that is built on a Constitution and a Bill of Rights and a healthy skepticism about overreaching government power. Before smartphones were invented, and to this day, if there is probable cause to think that you have abducted a child, or that you are engaging in a terrorist plot, or you are guilty of some serious crime, law enforcement can appear before at your doorstep and say, we have a warrant to search your home, and they can go into your bedroom and into your bedroom doors and rifle through your underwear to see if there's any evidence of wrongdoing. And we agree on that because we recognize that just like all of our other rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, et cetera, that there are going to be some constraints that we impose in order to make sure that we are safe, secure, and living in a civilized society. Now, technology is evolving so rapidly that new questions are being asked. And I am of the view that there are very real reasons why we want to make sure that government cannot just willy-nilly get into everybody's iPhones that is full of, or smartphones that are full of very personal information and very personal data. And let's face it, the whole Snowden disclosure episode elevated people's suspicions of this. So does popular culture, by the way, which makes it appear as if, you know, I'm in the sit room and I'm moving things. And I'm.
You've been watching Homeland.
There's like
right?
some half a fingerprint, and you know, half an hour later, I'm tracking the guy in the streets of Istanbul.
It's not nearly that cool.
It turns out it doesn't work that way.
Doesn't work that way.
Sometimes I'm just trying to get a connection.
Yeah.
Good. No, but look, that was a real issue. I will say, by the way, that, and I don't want to go too far afield, but the Snowden issue vastly overstated the dangers to U.S. citizens in terms of spying, because the fact of the matter is that actually our intelligence agencies are pretty scrupulous about U.S. persons, people on U.S. soil. What those disclosures did identify were excesses overseas with respect to people who are not in this country. A lot of those have been fixed. Don't take my word for it. There was a panel that was constituted, an independent panel that just graded all the reforms that we set up to avoid those charges. But I understand that raised suspicions, all right? So we're concerned about privacy. We don't want government to be looking through everybody's phones, willy-nilly, without any kind of oversight or probable cause or or a clear sense that it's targeted at somebody who might be a wrongdoer. What makes it even more complicated is the fact we also want really strong encryption. Because part of us preventing terrorism or preventing people from disrupting the financial system or our air traffic control system or a whole other set of systems that are increasingly digitalized is that hackers, state or non-state, can't just get in there and mess them up. So we've got two values, both of which are important.
Right.
Right? And the question we now have to ask is, if technologically it is possible to make an impenetrable device or system where the encryption is so strong that there's no key, there's no door at all, then how do we apprehend the child pornographer? How do we solve or disrupt a terrorist plot? What mechanisms do we have available to even do simple things like tax enforcement? Because if in fact you can't crack that at all, government can't get in, then everybody's walking around with a Swiss bank account in their pocket. All right? So there has to be some concession to the need to be able to get into that information somehow. Now, what folks who are on the encryption side will argue is any key whatsoever, even if it starts off as just being directed at one device, could end up being used on every device. That's just the nature of these systems. That is a technical question. I am not a software engineer. It is, I think, technically true, but I think it can be overstated. And so the question now becomes, we as a society, setting aside the specific case between the FBI and Apple, setting aside the commercial interests, the concerns about what could the Chinese government do with this, even if we trust the US government, setting aside all those questions, we're going to have to make some decisions about how do we balance these respective risks. And I've got a bunch of smart people sitting there talking about it, thinking about it. We have engaged the tech community aggressively to help solve this problem. My conclusion so far is that you cannot take an absolutist view on this. So if your argument is strong encryption no matter what, and we can and should in fact create black boxes, then that I think does not strike the kind of balance that we have lived with for 200, 300 years, and it's fetishizing our phones above every other value. And that can't be the right answer. I suspect that the answer is going to come down to how do we create a system where the encryption is as strong as possible, the key is as secure as possible, it is accessible by the smallest number of people possible for a subset of issues that we agree are important. How we design that is not something that I have the expertise to do, but I caution, I am way on the civil liberties side of this thing. Bill McCraven will tell you that I anguish a lot over the decisions we make in terms of how to keep this country safe, and I am not interested in overthrowing the values that have made us an exceptional and great nation simply for expediency. But the dangers are real. Maintaining law and order and a civilized society is important. Protecting our kids is important. And so I would just caution against taking an absolutist perspective on this, because we make compromises all the time. I haven't flown commercial in a while. But my understanding is it's not great fun going through security.
No,
but we make the concession because it's a big intrusion on our privacy. But we recognize it as important. We have stops for drunk drivers. It's an intrusion, but we think it's the right thing to do. And this notion that somehow our data, is different and can be walled off from those other trade-offs we make, I believe is incorrect. We do have to make sure, given the power of the internet and how much our lives are digitalized, that it is narrow and it is constrained and that there's oversight. And I'm confident this is something that we can solve, but we're going to need the tech community, software designers, people who care deeply about this stuff to help us solve it. Because what will happen is if everybody goes to their respective corners and the tech community says, you know what, either we have strong, perfect encryption, or else it's Big Brother and an Orwellian world. What you'll find is that after something really bad happens, the politics of this will swing and it will become sloppy and rushed, and it will go through Congress in ways that have not been thought through. And then you really will have a danger to our civil liberties, because we will have not done, the people who understand this best and who care most about privacy and civil liberties have sort of disengaged or have taken a position that is not sustainable for the general public as a whole over time.
Sadly, Mr. President, the clock is telling me that we're out of time. A lot of things I wanted to ask you. You gave a great answer on that question, and I'm happy to have that be the last bit that we did together. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm the president, so I'm going to take one more minute.
You will? Good.
And I just want to say,
we'll take it.
There are a number of different ways in which all of you can plug into what I've been talking about here today. So if you are interested in figuring out ways to make government services work better, you can go to whitehouse.gov or U.S. Digital Services and find out what they're doing. If you are interested in how we can make sure that classrooms are properly connected, you can plug into what we're doing with ConnectEd. One of my favorite projects that's just gotten started over the last several months is diapers are really expensive. And we've actually set up a system whereby through social media and the internet, non-for-profits are able to make bulk purchases of diapers, save 25% on those so that they can distribute them to low-income moms and families. And it's a convergence of diaper makers and logistics companies and internet companies. And we sort of convened the thing, but it's not running through a government program. So whatever your interests are, whatever your passions are, whatever your concerns are, we need you. And I want to underscore the fact that, in 10 months, I will not have this office. It has been the great privilege of my life. But it's not like I stopped caring about the things that I care about right now. And it's not like I'm going to stop being involved in promoting the best, most prosperous, most peaceful, most tolerant, most ecologically responsible America that I can. I'll be sitting in an audience with you. And I expect you to step up and get involved because the country needs you. And if the brain power and talent that's on display here today and throughout this conference takes up that baton, then I'm going to be really confident about the future of this country. All right?
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, guys.
President. Mr. President, thank you so much.
That's right.
Really enjoyed it. So